Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine, while at the same time, I'm going to address a topic that I talked about in my recent video. That topic got a lot of pushback from viewers of the channel. And rightly so. I can understand if I said something that you inherently, through lack of education and or information, fully understand why I said it. And what I said was that in the case of Ukraine, the Russia-Ukrainian war, that taking the high ground, taking terrain features, whether it be a large hill with a commanding view of the battlescape, or even a mountain, such as what you're looking at here in Syria, a Mount Qasun. This mountain, I think, is a classic example of why it is a good thing to control very large, high altitude, high elevation terrain features. In this case, in terms of the geopolitical, the military situation inside of Syria, this is a good thing. Controlling this terrain feature is something the Syrians have been able to do very effectively in terms of controlling the areas in and around Damascus and the ability of Syrian, Free Syrian Army, quote-unquote, forces to enter Damascus or not enter Damascus, preventing them from entering Damascus. But in the case of Ukraine, in controlling terrain features, which are actually smaller, obviously, than Mount Qasun, it's a different story. It is a different war. The Ukrainians essentially do not have an effective air force, not as effective as the Russian Air Force. The Russian Air Force is far more active and far more larger than the Ukrainian forces, the Ukrainian Air Force. Furthermore, the Russian Federation has a true multi-domain capability. So what does that mean? How can we compare and contrast what is happening in Syria in regards to the Syrian military, the Syrian army, the Republican Guard, control of Mount Qasun, versus maybe the Ukrainians controlling a smaller terrain feature in Ukraine? Well, first, the Syrians are not facing an adversary. They are not facing another military that has multi-domain capability. Meaning the Syrian insurgents, the Syrian jihadists, whatever group we are looking at, as there are multiple groups, they do not have an air force. They do not have attack helicopters. They do not have space assets, satellites, drones, reconnaissance aircraft. The Russians have a true sense and shoot capability. What does that mean? Well, it means that, hypothetically, if the Syrians were facing a multi-domain adversary, such as the Israelis, okay? The Israelis would have the capability of identifying targets on Mount Qasun and then using precision-guided munitions to strike targets, even very well dug-in targets, that have positioned themselves on this mountain. So again, the Syrian insurgents do not. The Israelis would. So it would make practical sense for the Syrians to control this terrain feature. And in this case, in high-intensity insurgency, yes, it does make sense to control terrain features. Absolutely reasonable. But if we were to change this, and we were to say now that the Syrians are trying to prevent an Israeli incursion into Syria, or the Israeli takeover of Damascus, for say, just a hypothetical scenario, the Syrian position on Mount Qasun could be in jeopardy, the forces that are stationed on this terrain feature. You can see them, the Israelis can see them, and the Israelis can strike those targets. Even if they needed to use tactical nuclear weapons, the Israelis, they could get into the mountain and destroy targets in the interior as well. So it would be a very difficult situation for the Syrians, and much different than the Syrians facing an insurgency force. So again, it makes perfect sense to control the high ground in this situation. Now, in the comment section, they were talking about, I'd seen some comments in reference to infantry tactics. So yes, if we are talking about just infantry, low-intensity warfare, then yes, absolutely, it makes complete military sense and would be within any armed forces military doctrine to take terrain features, to take hills. Completely reasonable. But when you inject the multi-domain aspect outside of the scope of just infantry, meaning now you have an army that has an air force, it has surveillance drones, it has attack helicopters, it has precision-guided long-range artillery, it has almost 24-hour sensing abilities to watch that terrain feature, both at elevation from above and from the surface as well. Now, modern war has made it more difficult for even infantry formations to control terrain features. That is without a doubt absolutely the case. The ability and the technology that has increased in terms of optics, sniper rifles, have vastly increased. And it would give any force that's positioning themselves on a terrain feature, on a mountain, pause to make themselves viewable from forces at lower elevation, which would have that capability, that counter sniper capability. Controlling a terrain feature is not like it was in the 1900s, the 1800s. Obviously, during that period of time, very important to control a terrain feature, a hill, a mountain. The Rock of Gibraltar, case in point. Different technology, different time. So in the case of Ukraine, where you have the Ukrainians, say, seizing the quote-unquote high ground, seizing hills above Russian positions, it has always been in the Soviet and Russian doctrine to shell, obliterate terrain features, and I'm speaking from firsthand experience. The U.S. military, at least in the 90s, if it was facing a Soviet Warsaw Pact army, was very, very hesitant to occupy terrain features. Would the U.S. military use the terrain feature as an observation post? Yes, absolutely. It would be used as that. Is it a requirement in modern war to have this observation post on a mountain. No, it's not. With drones, with satellites, with aircraft, that surveillance can be performed with those assets. So you don't have to risk putting an observation post on a terrain feature that's going to be constantly shelled. And shelled very precisely, especially if you have a near-peer adversary with the same sorts of technology that you are deploying. And what do I mean by that? I mean satellites, reconnaissance aircraft, aircraft with precision strike capability, long-range multiple launch rocket systems, very heavy laser-guided artillery. Those systems, which the Russians possess, have decreased the value of those terrain features. Now, if the Russians seize control of a terrain feature and the Ukrainians are on the low ground, control the low ground, in front of the Russian positions that control the high ground, does that change anything? A little bit. The Ukrainians have the ability to launch precision-guided strikes. They have HIMARS. They have limited aircraft capability that can drop JDAM glide bombs. So in that sense, yes, it's very much the same even for the Ukrainians. And I'm not saying that if the Russians seize control of the high ground, that gives them more advantage and they have that capability to do that without suffering the same repercussions as the Ukrainians. I would say that's somewhat limited. I would say the Snake Island incident and battle that occurred, where you have real-time surveillance and you're able to strike that island, makes it very difficult for both the Ukrainians and the Russians to permanently occupy that island if one side is committed to driving out the other force. So again, just because you take a terrain feature in this war, the Ukrainian-Russian war, doesn't necessarily give you an advantage. And in some cases, depending on how you're deploying your forces, could be lethal for your army. So I hope that makes sense. I'm not saying that taking a terrain feature at any point is not done in modern war. It absolutely is. Case in Syria, done effectively. It depends on the force, the opposing force that you are fighting. Again, a near-peer adversary with multi-domain capability, it is going to be much more difficult to operate on a terrain feature. Fighting an insurgent army that doesn't have near-peer capability, that doesn't have multi-domain capability, that's different. Absolutely. By all means, take the hill. Use the hill. The Syrians have done an excellent job controlling areas near Damascus with artillery positioned on Mount Qasun. They have effectively made it very difficult for Syrian insurgents to operate near Damascus. That in conjunction with air power. Now, if they infiltrate into the urban areas of Damascus, that changed things a little bit. Made it a little more difficult. But I hope that makes sense. I hope this explained things a little bit in terms of what I meant by taking hills, taking terrain features, taking mountains in the age that we're in, the age of warfare that we're in, the 21st century. Very, very different than taking a hill during the age of musketry, during even the Vietnam War. Okay, much different. Technology has changed, and it's changing warfare. And again, I promise you, from firsthand experience, the U.S. military tries to when engaging a near-peer adversary, such as the Soviets, or at the time it was the Soviets, who had a very specific doctrine to annihilate forces positioned on terrain features. The U.S. did not deploy on those terrain features, not in company-sized, battalion-sized formations. Observation posts were used, but outside of that, it wasn't a common practice to dig in on top of a hill. It's not the way wars are fought with a near-peer multi-domain adversary. Insurgency? Yes, different. If you know and you have complete air supremacy, air superiority, and you are controlling the proverbial war clock, yes, that's different. But that's not what is happening on the ground in the Russian-Ukrainian war. Right now, the Russians control the clock. The Russians have control, or for the most part, they have control of the airspace near the line of contact, near the front line. Or they're able to bring more assets to bear against opposing forces near the front line. And again, it's multi-domain. It's fixed-wing aircraft, it's Su-34s, fullbacks, it's Su-25s, Su-24s, attack helicopters, long-range artillery, short-range artillery, long-range advanced sniper systems, advanced optics, satellites. That is what has changed the dynamics of seizing terrain features. I hope this helped. I hope this made sense. I hope it clarified those who took what I said in terms of just face value and then pushed back. I hope this provides a little bit of education, a little bit of awareness. Thank you for joining us. More to come. And as always, have a good day.